Blog Talk Radio.
All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and as always, we've got a great show for you tonight. This Thursday, March 29th, is going to be the last show, of course, for March, and hard to believe we're going to be moving into April next week. It seems like this 2018 season seems to be just flying right by, but glad you can join us tonight. We've got a great show for you. We're going to starting off with a special Coach's Corner panel with a solo professional, Monty Scheinblum. He's going to be joining me here in just a moment or two. And then a little bit later on in the show, I'm going to be joined by my very special guest. There's going to be two of them on tonight. Brett Cohen, of course, you're all familiar with, the golf fitness instructor and Fitness Over 50 authority, and he's also the founder of the New York Golf Fitness Guru. And he's going to be joined by a good friend of his, Dr. Thomas Kearn. He's a chiropractor, and he's with the Axon Health Associates up in New York as well. And he's going to be joining us. We've got a great discussion on the second half. But let me just remind everybody, of course, we are live every Thursday evening from 6 to 8 p.m. Central. For those of you on Central Time, that's 7 to 9 on the East Coast and 4 to 6 for those of you out west in California or Pacific Time. Best way to find us is go to blogtalkradio.com. And under the search key, just type Golf Talk Live or just add / Golf Talk Live, and that will bring you to the main page. And, of course, as I said, we are live Thursday evenings. But for some reason, if you can't join us live, not to worry. Just visit that link, scroll down to the on-demand section. And, of course, all of the shows are auto-recorded as we air live. And you can always scroll down to the on-demand section and listen to them whenever it's convenient for you. Or you can go to iTunes.com, Stitcher.com, and now TuneIn.com. And under the podcast section, again, just type in Golf Talk Live. So there's lots of great ways to connect with the show. If you want to find out who's going to be on the show, then you need to follow here in a couple of areas. And I've got a couple of Facebook pages. Of course, my personal page, Ted Odorico, and it's Odorico is the correct spelling of my last name. You can check on my homepage there on Facebook, or under the company page, which is Golf Talk Live blog. That also will tell you who's going to be on the show each and every week. Or you can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Ted and Buck CEO in capital letters. And, of course, thank you to all of the new followers on Twitter. Or you can also get up with the show on LinkedIn, linkedin.com. And, again, just under my personal page, Ted Odorico, and you can find me there. And under my posts and activity, you'll see all kinds of good information about the show as well. So lots of ways to connect. And speaking of connecting, let me bring up my very special guest here. As I mentioned, Monty Scheinblum is going to be joining me on the Coach's Corner panel tonight. We're going to have a special panel discussion. He's the son of a Major League Baseball player. And Monty himself actually was trying to aspire to follow in his father's footsteps. Unfortunately, he developed a major elbow injury, and through some reconstruction at about age 15, forced him to give up that dream of baseball. But he decided to switch gears, if you will, and developed a new passion for golf. So we're glad he's done that. He obviously had some early success in the game and eventually led him to UCLA, where he played golf for the Bruins before turning professional. And in 1992, he was the world long drive champion and was runner-up twice. And he was also a trick shot exhibitionist. We'll talk to him a little bit about that as well along the way. And then, of course, he became a full-time professional tournament player with, of course, goals of playing on the PGA and subsequently the Champions Tour. So without further ado, let me bring on my very special guest on the Coach's Corner panel tonight, Monty Scheinblum. Monty, good evening.
How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Always glad to have you on the show. And I know we were talking just a little bit off air just a moment or two before we went live, and we were talking about something which I'm going to ask you about now. When you were last on the show, you were going through the process of going through Q School for the Champions Tour, and you had actually at that point, I believe, made it into the finals. What's the update there? What's happened since then?
It's been a bit of a roller coaster. I did in fact make the finals of the Q School, and a few days before I was leaving for Florida, I was doing something I shouldn't have been. I was playing soccer with my son. I have a 9-year-old son at his soccer practice, and just kicking the ball around with the kids, not doing anything too dumb. Well, at least I didn't think it was.
Right.
And I badly tore the meniscus in my right knee. And, I got my knee drained and cortisone shot and went down to the finals and gave it a shot. But it wasn't too I didn't play very well. And I basically spent all of last year having surgery and rehabbing it and trying to get back to 100%.
Right.
And, so, yeah, I mean, that was kind of a bummer, and a little bit my own fault, obviously. Even though it was a little bit unfortunate, but it's one of those life lessons that you know better next time.
Yeah, it's it kind of reminds me. I was trying to think of who this was back a few years ago, and one of the young guns on the PGA Tour decided that he was going to do some downhill skiing before a tournament. He was overseas. I think it was one of the European players, and he ended up breaking something. I don't know if it was his hand or what have you. And he said this very same thing. He says, you live, you're young only once in your life, and you want to go out and have fun. But he says it probably wasn't the best smart thing for me to do at the time in hindsight. But nevertheless, he's back out touring. I wish I could remember who that player was, but maybe it'll come to me as the show progresses. But very unfortunate. I hate that for you. You worked so hard to get where you did, and I know that you'll. I'm assuming you're going to give it another shot when you feel 100%.
Oh yeah, it's funny. This is actually pertinent to the discussion on the swing. Is before I completely wrecked it, there was probably some damage there to begin with. And I had built a swing about not having much range of motion in my right knee, my trail knee. And, that swing worked. Well, after having the surgery and rehabbing it, I actually have better range of motion in the surgically repaired knee that I have in my left knee, the front knee. And now my body works differently. My hips rotate better. I can put more pressure, on the trail toes as I'm coming into impact. So now my swing works completely differently. And, there are pluses and minuses. So, even a positive, and the reason why this is pertinent is you see someone like David Duval. He was the number one player in the world. He got in a significantly better physical condition, but then his swing didn't work the same anymore, and he kind of lost it. And, there are a lot of proponents that say that a lot of Tiger's problems with his swing are the result of getting, too big in the upper body. I don't try to get into those debates, but just bringing it up. And, that's why, little small things that change in your body. I know a lot of students that I've had have had large weight losses. They've gone from 250 pounds to 200 pounds, and they were like a 5 handicap, 50, and now they're 200 pounds, and they can't break 80 anymore. So you have to be aware that you have a physical change, that your swing is going to change whether you want it to or not.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Monty. I agree wholeheartedly with that. I've noticed that as well. I mean, even in my own game, I was always a kind of a lightweight. I'm 6'4", so I got a lot of height, and I was always a pretty light guy. I was probably between 175 and 200 for a long, long time, and now I'm upwards of about 225 to 230. I'm still certainly not large by any means because my height balances me out, but your joints are not, if you've been at a certain weight for a long time and then suddenly you add on, 20, 30, even 40 pounds to what you normally are, you feel it in a lot of your joints. So it takes away a little bit of the mobility. So I'm trying to whittle my way back down a little bit to bring some of that back. But you're exactly right in your analogy is you can literally change the way you play with something even as simple as either losing or gaining a few pounds. Either way, it's amazing how much that can affect it.
See, that's been a part of the deal as well. Is, you know, while I was sitting on my behind for 6 months, you know, healing and rehab, I put on 25 pounds. So then that was, you know, an extra 25 pounds. And then since then, I've taken off 15 of that 25. So physically, I'm kind of going back and forth and, you know, not really trying to rebuild my swing so much as just trying to find a baseline to work off of because of so many physical changes. And people will tend to discount that, and you really can't. Any kind of physical change like that is going to completely change the way you move the golf club.
Well, yeah, and you're exactly right. And, you know, just another, to add a little bit more fuel to the fire, you know, we see a lot, especially, and again, more so with the men, as men get a little bit older, as we start to age and get above that 50 mark, you know, we start to put a lot of extra weight in around our midsection, is where most men carry a lot of it. And that can affect a lot of things with posture and things like that as well. I mean, a lot of people, you start to see a lot of the older generations, and there's other factors obviously involved. We don't need to get into all of them, but you start to see a little more slumping in the shoulders, a rounded shoulders look. You know, they're, instead of having that nice sort of vertical back, it's now, you know, sort of a curve, if you will, just because their posture is no longer you know, able to hold as well, because they're carrying that extra weight. It's uncomfortable, so they become more relaxed. So there's a lot of physical changes that can certainly affect that, and there's things obviously that you can do to help, and with some good exercise and things like that. But you're exactly right. It's amazing what can change. Even sometimes even the minute difference in how you physically change can actually have big changes on the golf course, and so it'd be interesting to. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No. I mean, go ahead. Finish your point, because go ahead. I'm sorry. Say what you're going to say.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, you know, great that you're obviously recognizing that, you know, you've already had an injury that you've had to overcome, but also you've noticed that with that extra weight on, it also made some other changes that you're now going to have to address, and that, you know, that's all I was really going to add to it. But go ahead and go with your thought.
Oh no, and this, you know, that's why these discussions are so great, is because one point leads to the next, and this discussion leads to an additional point why you have to be extremely careful what you teach young, you know, 9, 10, 12, 15-year-old golfers, because if you start to pigeonhole them into movement X because that's your preference golf swing, their body a year from now is going to be completely different. They're going to get taller. They're going to get physically stronger, and move X might work for them now and might be a complete disaster if they grow 6 inches and put on 20 pounds. So whenever I teach your golfers, I'm extremely careful about not being too dogmatic in my approach to their swings. You know, I kind of try to make sure that, you know, they're not too funky with anything, and that they swing in balance, and that they learn to create speed. But, you know, I'm not picky about swing plane, or because, you know, a lot of kids, you know, especially the real thin ones, and especially teenage girls, don't have a lot of upper body strength, so they will early extend badly to create speed. And generally speaking, early extension, especially severe, isn't real, you know, something you really want. But if you teach that out of them, you might be robbing them of some speed, and it's likely something that they will gradually lose on their own as they get bigger and stronger. So, you know, you're walking a fine line when you're teaching those kids during their growing phase. And And you just got to be really, really careful that you're not, there's the Tiger Woods who developed his swing when he's 5 years old and was pretty much the same swing all through his teenage years, and Butch Harmon until he switched to Haney. But that's the exception rather than the rule.
Right.
You see most kids, their swings change significantly even over a 2 or 3 year period.
Right, exactly. And I think there's something else too, and it's a great point that you raise up, because I think as golf professionals, I think one of the things that we have to be careful of is sort of pigeonholing everybody into one theory or one methodology, because we're all uniquely different as individuals, and our body styles, our body types, and just because I'm 6'4" and this person over here might be, 6'4" or 6'3", doesn't necessarily mean the swing is going to be exactly the same for us, because there could be a lot of other factors involved. So I think we have to be careful and mindful of that. And I think also too, Monty, something else that, as you were pointing out, teaching some of the youngsters, there's a lot of changes that happens from coordination. As an example, the younger kids, whether it's male or female, lack a certain amount of coordination. They haven't developed some of their little muscles yet that give them that sort of that's why you see, toddlers will sort of stagger back and forth. They haven't really mastered certain coordination movements yet. And then once they get into their teenage years and maybe early 20s, they've developed that. Now they're starting to put on mass. And again, a whole new changes. And then as we, evolve a little further down the evolutionary line, we start to lose some of that. So again, there's always a constant change throughout our cycle of life. And I think as golf professionals, we've got to be careful that, what we're teaching them today, we might have to change somewhat, 2-3 years down the road because of some of the factors that you pointed out. So some great points there. Monty, I want to ask you. Right. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you. No, what I was going to ask you was, one of the things that I think a lot of professionals do is they'll say, well, watch so-and-so, whether it's Tiger, it doesn't matter who it is, but watch the professionals and look at what they're doing. Give us an idea from an amateur standpoint, what they can learn from watching the pros, and maybe give some specific examples of what you see the pros doing that would greatly benefit a lot of our amateurs out there that are tuning in tonight.
That's a really, really good question. And I think, and this actually even is a transition from the previous point, all too many amateurs will say something like, oh, I'm built like Justin Thomas. I'm going to try and do what he does, and that is almost universally a complete disaster. And this is what I always tell people. Take a screenshot from a tour player and try and emulate that position, because the likelihood of doing the 173 things that led up to that position is zero. To answer your original question, what can we learn from tour players is, this is what I tell all of my students. I never will say, here's Tiger Woods, here's Adam Scott, here's you, look what he's doing, look what you're doing, do what he does. What I tend to do is, when I use tour players, is I will say, okay, look, in my opinion, you are lacking this movement in your swing. And then I will bring up 5 tour players and say, look, see how all 5 of these guys do that? So I think what we can learn from tour players is if you watch 20 of them and say, wow, all 20 of them do these same 2 things, those 2 things are probably pretty important.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I think something that we can encourage, and again, they don't have to mimic exactly, it's always good for our players to mimic good things, not necessarily movements in the swing or things like that. Obviously, there are certain areas, as you just pointed out, that are important. But one thing that a lot of amateurs lack is a good pre- and post-shot routine. They don't really have anything. It's not consistent. So what I sometimes will say to my students is I will say, and again, I might take 3 or 4 different players, and I will say to them, I want you to watch how they approach each shot, and then I'll have them write down what they did before each shot, and exactly, the number of steps they took, the number of waggles, how many times they looked up at the hole, and how many times they, looked back down at the ball before they actually, executed the shot. And the idea is I want them to get a sense that these players have developed a routine and consistently repeat that. I don't want them to copy that. They can certainly take things that maybe are comfortable to them or ideas, but I want them to develop a similar routine for them to be able to master. And then I want them to repeat it the same as they're seeing the pros do it on TV. Not necessarily the same pre-shot or post-shot routines. I want them to develop their own, but I want them to be able to consistently repeat that movement before they hit every shot, so that they ingrain some positive imagery and preparation before they hit each of their shots. And that's something that I like to do, and I don't know whether that's something you do as well, but I think that's important. I think it's what a lot of amateurs lack.
I think that's 100% correct. And the key word that you used is repeat. And
yes.
I think all too often amateur golfers get locked up in, oh, look at how deliberate this guy is and how good he is, and then their
right.
pre-shot routine takes 45 seconds, and this repeat is the key word. It doesn't matter what it is. You said it exactly right. I agree with that 100%. As long as you can repeat it, and I can't think of one of my first timers. Every time someone comes the first time, I can't think of one of them off the top of my head that repeated what they did more than once in a row. So I agree
right.
with you. That's 100. Routine is huge. The golf swing is repetitive motion, and if your routine before and after isn't repetitive, good luck.
Well, you're exactly right too, and the reason why I say that, Monty, is this. The golf swing is also about rhythm and timing with your body. And if you don't, in order to develop a good rhythm and timing, it's not just a matter about swinging the club. I mean, obviously there's an importance there, but it's also the rhythm and timing of your movements. So as an example, if the first time you come up off the tee and, you take 10 paces and you get up there and, a couple of waggles and you're looking up and down or whatever it is that your pre-shot routine is, and you hit a great shot. Well, then you get out in the fairway. Now you're only taking 3 steps. You only look up once, and you've quickened the pace. So what ultimately happens is then you rush that shot. So you've sort of gotten out of sync. And if you look at even players, whether it be Ernie Els as an example, very methodical about all of their movements. The timing and the rhythm of those movements is exactly the same day in, day out. Freddie Couples is another one. Nick Price has a very quick pace. His pre-shot routine and his shots are quick in themselves, but they're always consistent. And that's why they do as well as they do out on the PGA Tour and of course, the Champions Tour, because they've developed a rhythm and timing with their body. And I think what a lot of amateurs do, and I think this is the point that I was trying to make, is they get themselves out of sync. 1 minute they're rushing to the shot, the next minute they're slowing it down, and it depends on their mood or what's happened, with the previous shot, and they get themselves out of a rhythm. And the next thing you know, their whole game or round falls apart. So that's why I say I think sometimes developing that pre-shot or post-shot routine is crucial to becoming a better player. You may still hit a cruddy shot. Those can be worked on the practice tee. But if you want to develop a good timing or rhythm, then you need to work on the before and the after shot as well. Just a little food for thought.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree more. And you brought up something that is so underrated and so under-discussed and so misinterpreted. And the people listening are going to say, come on, Monty, those are semantics. And it's not. All too often, you use the right word, rhythm. And you brought up Ernie Els and Fred Couples, and then on the flip side, Nick Price. Yep. All too often, amateur golfers misrepresent rhythm and use the word tempo instead. I want to have a slow, smooth tempo, and that absolutely wrecks 1 out of 3 people that come to me for the first time. Because what happens is they get themselves moving so slowly going back that they get so anxious to start the downswing. Sure, they have a slow tempo, but their rhythm is terrible. And you brought up Nick Price, who had a super fast tempo, but one of the greatest rhythms in the history of the game. And people are absolutely dumbstruck when I put they come, Monty, I'm really, really quick. I'm super, super quick, and I just can't slow down. And they're dumbfounded when I put their swings up next to Ernie Els, and he's walking down the fairway when they're still in the middle of their backswings. So I can't stress enough to the people listening that your proper use of the term rhythm, that is what's important, and not tempo. You can have a fast tempo, you can have a slow tempo, but having the proper timing to your rhythm is, if it's not the most important thing in the swing, it's pretty close to the top.
Right. And a lot of people might be scratching their head and say, well, how do I know what my rhythm is? How do I find my rhythm? Well, just walking, just a normal walk will more often than not tell you what your rhythm is. You see some people that are very slow and methodical in there. Well, obviously they have a slower rhythm. People that have maybe a quicker step and a quicker pace, they're a little bit faster. So take your cues from that. Like you said, the last thing that you want to do is, if you're somebody that has a quick rhythm, to want to do the opposite and try to slow everything down, because what's going to happen is your body will not work in sync with itself.
Absolutely.
It'll get out of sync because it goes outside of what your body is designed for. That's why, again, you're not going to necessarily teach a person that's 5 foot tall and maybe 185 pounds necessarily the same swing that somebody that's 6'4" and 240 pounds. There may be similarities and there are certain key areas, but again, we're all different, and it's important as instructors that we identify those things right from the get-go. Ball flight and all that other stuff, those fall into place, but really it's establishing the individual's rhythm first, and understanding that, I think, is key before we start really getting them to do anything else. Let me just ask you
a really good.
Sorry, go ahead.
I found a really good way that people can find that is you can go get a free metronome app and change the settings on it. So it goes click, 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 click. And what you do is you start the backswing on the 1 count and you start the downswing on the 2 count, and you speed it up and slow it down until you find yourself swinging to that cadence. And that's the easiest way that I've found of finding that personal, optimal rhythm that each golfer should have.
Yeah. And the other thing too is it's all also about balance. I mean, if you have to be able to swing within yourself. If you're somebody that has a very slow rhythm and suddenly you start speeding everything out, what ultimately ends up happening is you get out of balance. And I don't care how wide of a stance you have, if you're swinging out of your boots or out of your golf shoes, and your body is not set up to do that. I mean, when you look at somebody like you said, Nick Price, as the example I use for a quicker rhythm, he was able to still swing within himself. Now, if you were to take somebody like Ernie Els or Freddie, as we suggested, and tried to speed it up, more than likely they would not be in balance throughout their swing. Now, they might be able to pull it off because they played for so long, but ultimately they would find it very difficult to play with Nick Price's rhythm and vice versa, because that's not how their bodies are rhythmically designed. And this is what ultimately happens with a lot of players. Monty, I want to jump forward here a little bit, and I want to keep in line with the pros here for just a second. And I always find there's certain things I like to watch for. I enjoy watching the ladies play as well on the LPGA. I think some great young ladies, and there's some great seasoned veterans of the game as well. And I personally believe that there's a lot of things that us guys, if you will, can learn from these ladies on how they play and how they approach their game on the golf course. What are your thoughts there? Is there things that we can, as men, can learn from watching the ladies play and how they approach the game?
See, I look at it more generally than that. I look at more as like anybody that excels at that level
mm-hmm.
at something, whether it's a man, a woman, a college player, a junior golfer, because people always ask me, what should I be looking for? And I say anything specific. I say, you know what? You're going to see something different in each one of them. Like, wow, that person, they don't hit it particularly well, but goodness gracious, anything inside of 10 feet is a gimme. Or you'll see another guy that, he's not a particularly good wedge player, but boy, it doesn't matter if the fairway's 15 yards wide. He hits the fairway, or she hits the fairway. And but so in general, to go back to your original question, in general, I think what the average male can learn from an LPGA professional is they do an excellent job of playing within themselves. You'll see some of those late, they hit it 215 off the tee, 220 off the tee on the fly, which is what a tour player hits a 4 or a 5 iron, yet they understand that's their game. They know not to attack certain pins. They know not to, try to do any forced carries. They know their game. They know what they're capable of, and that's how they approach it. And then the opposite is true, is you'll see the super aggressive players will say, playing safe, they're disasters when they lay up. So, those are the two ends of the spectrum there, and you have to be who you are. And laying up when you're an aggressive, the thing that I can remember on the passive side, I want to say it was maybe 20 years ago. Chip Beck, it's Masters Week, and just to throw this in there, I'm going to my first Masters next week, so I'm pretty excited about that. 20 years ago, Chip Beck was sitting in the 15th fairway, and he got a ton of criticism for not going for the green on 15 from the top of the hill because he needed to make eagle to have a chance to win. But I was being a super aggressive player myself, I didn't criticize him because I've met Chip. That's not his personality. That's not his game.
Right.
And even though maybe that was the only chance he had to win the tournament, his odds of pulling that off were 0 because that's not him. Whereas on the flip side, you see someone do something super, like if you tell John Daly to lay up, he's liable to chunk the wedge 30 yards trying to lay up because that's not who he is. So again, to get back to your original point, all of the people that succeed are who they are, and that's why they succeed. And as soon as they try to not be that person, they fail. So, your original question is, what can the average man learn from an LPGA player? They do what they do. And it sounds, corny and simple, but it's the truth. If you're a slicer, don't aim down the right side of the fairway when there's OB right, thinking you might hit this one straight.
Yeah. And we know there's a few of you out there that are probably going to unfortunately not listen to that advice and end up doing just that. But no, that's why we're still doing what we do, is to help some of those out. A great answer, Monty, by the way. I think one of the things too that I look at when watching the ladies, you're right, they play within themselves. But I also notice too, and obviously there are some exceptions, they're not as they're not focusing as much on the power game. And obviously on the PGA Tour with some of the young guys out there now, I mean, it's all about distance. They're trying to get it out there as far as possible. And ultimately the ladies are to a degree. But for them, they know that once they get within a certain yardage around that green, whether it be 100 yards or 120 yards, they've fine-tuned their short game to a point that they know what they're comfortable with, they know what they're able, what shots. So they just want to get themselves into position. So for them, it's more about positioning as opposed to, just bombing it out there and, coming in with one club. They want to get themselves in position. So they're very methodical about that. And they focus a lot, I believe, on the short game area because that's a strength for them. I mean, very, very good putters. I mean, not to say that there aren't great putters on the PGA Tour, but I find that the ladies, again, there's some aggressive ones out there, but they tend to be more conservative in their play in some cases, but very methodical in how they go about it. And so there's always some things, like you said, there's some good tips I think you can get on either side, but I think there's some good tips that the LPGA ladies have going for them that could certainly help some of the guys, because I think the guys get caught up on distance too much, and there's a lot of other areas of the game that are much more important than just how far you can hit it. Which brings me to this question, Monty, and I want to throw this out there. Obviously, you've been a world long drive champion. Are there secrets to hitting the long ball, and if so, what are they?
Well, just like anything, just like any other athletic movement, you don't ask someone with a 45-inch vertical leap, how can I jump 45 inches? Well, you can't. How can I hit it 400 yards? Well, you can't. But what you want to do is maximize your ability. And so that's to answer your question. Number one is there is no substitute, not training programs, not swing methods, not anything. There is no substitute for learning you yourself swinging as fast, not as hard as you can, while still hitting the ball in the middle of the club face. That's something that's not talked about enough. You have a guy swinging 120 miles an hour and he hits it in the heel, it's not going to go as far as someone who swings 110 miles an hour and hits it in the middle of the club face. So that should be the top of everybody's list. And that's a trial and error process, okay? But the number one technical swing issue is, and this is going to sound very, very vague and random, but it's the secret. If you want to know the secret to longer distances, it's learning how to sequence your transition properly. And everybody's listening to me going, great, what does that mean? Okay? What that means is, for you individually, that's going to be something different. It's going to depend on your body size, how you set up, your grip, where you set it at the top of the swing, and whatnot. But to be a little bit more specific, you hear people say, oh, well, swing your arms as fast as you can. And then you have other people say, no. Firing the hips, that's where club head speed comes from. And then you see the data points. Oh, well, the kinematic sequence and decelling this segment and blah, blah, blah. And it becomes very confusing. Okay?
Right.
So here's what I tell people. Here's what I say. I say, look, whenever I'm teaching golf and I get blank looks from people when I'm trying to explain something, my default position is always to go away from golf. Mm-hmm. The easiest way to explain how to transition correctly is it works the exact same way as driving a stick shift car. Okay? When you drive a stick shift car, you push in the clutch, you shift, let out the clutch, and give it gas. Okay? And the better you sequence those movements, the faster you can get the car to jump off the line and accelerate. And the way the body works is exactly the same way. So in my analogy, if you fire the hips too quickly, letting out the clutch, you try to shift, you grind the gears. If you try to shift early and give it gas before you're letting out the clutch, well, you wind the engine up and you blow the engine up. So if you want to learn what maximum distance is, and it's you can have an instructor help you along with you personally, but it's mostly a trial and error process in getting your body to fire in the proper sequence and transition as well as you can. And that, quite honestly, is the secret to hitting the ball farther, is learning to transition correctly.
Yeah, and well said, by the way, Monty. I think, too, that a lot of people, try to equate power, and you're exactly right. I mean, you have to be able to swing the club faster to generate more club head speed. But if you do it in such a way, which goes back to what we talked about earlier about rhythm and timing, is if you do it to a point where you're now becoming out of rhythm, then your sequence gets out of line as well. And so what I always like to do is I like to get people to swing a little bit easier to start off with and just hit some balls, even if it only goes a third of the distance, and then gradually as long as they're keeping that sequence, build up that swing and get to the point to an area where their swing now is taking them out of sequence. And that's generally where their maximum capability. And that doesn't mean they can't move that line a little bit more with some proper training and proper work. But the truth of the matter is, again, because we're all different, you might be able to swing the club head, 120 miles an hour. I might only be able to do 110 miles an hour. That might be my maximum to keep myself within balance and within my own rhythm. So, when we see these numbers being thrown out, and this is something that always bothers me a little bit when we get people on different scopes and, whether it be TrackMan or something else, and, well, you got to get this number and you got that number. My numbers might be entirely different than your numbers. Yep. Obviously, there's certain commonalities, of course, but again, so I'm always a little bit leery when we rely too much on technology to drive. And again, I'm all for technology, don't get me wrong, but when that's driving the message on how we want our players to react solely on the numbers, sometimes they're not getting the whole story. And again, if the players are entirely different, again, my numbers might be different from yours, so we're sometimes doing them a disservice. And I think your analogy on hitting a longer ball, whether it's with a driver or with a club, with your irons, I think is right. You've got to be within sequence, and you've got to keep it within the rhythm and timing of your own body. Well said.
You'll find this funny what you said about when I try to instill in every one of my students, every one of them, regardless of skill level, and you're going to find this funny when this comes out of my mouth, is in the normal course of golf, I say 25 to 50% of your practice should be hitting your 7-iron about 60 to 70% of its maximum distance with a shorter backswing.
Yep.
And if you're in the middle of a swing change, that number should be 50 to 75%. And because if you can't make a golf swing from left arm parallel backswing to a right arm parallel finish and hit it 2/3 of your maximum distance, what luck are you going to have with a full swing?
Right, exactly.
Getting to your point on the numbers, I have a flight scope launch monitor. I have a 3D motion capture system. I have a body track pressure mat. But adhering closely to the numbers drives me nuts. Monty, I'm hitting down 6 degrees on my 7-iron. Help me shallow out because I know the tour average is only down 3.5. And then my head explodes. and when I come around and regain consciousness, I say, look, if 3.5 is the average, wouldn't that dictate that there are probably some 5s and 6s out there? Oh, yeah. And do you want to get your number to the tour average at the expense of hitting the ball? No. Well, then, if the number in and of itself is causing an issue, like if a guy's 12, 15 degrees to the right swing path and he's hitting snap hooks as a result, well, then maybe we better address that. But, if his vertical swing plane is a bit too steep and he's playing the best golf of his life, do we really want to mess with that? And like you said, technology is fantastic, but when you have a guy sitting on the driving range, saying, all right, buddy, your swing path is 8 degrees to the right. We want it 3 right because that's the perfect push draw number. And then that's all he says. That's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. We have to be careful. And I think it's great to have access to this information. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. But I think we have to be careful because, unfortunately, what's happened over the last decade or so with a lot of the insurgence of a lot of technology is the consumers have bought into it to the point where they're now giving you the numbers that they want because of what they're hearing or seeing on TV, and without really understanding how it's going to affect their game. They just assume, well, like you said, that's the number I need to have because so-and-so on the tour, that's where he's at, or that's what the average tour player is doing. So I need to be doing that if I want to be a better player. And it may be entirely different for that individual because, again, their body type is different than, probably 90% or 99% of the people that are out there on the PGA or LPGA tour. So, again, it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning is really finding your own game and not, trying to duplicate something that you're seeing on TV. All right, let's move it forward here on just a couple of quick questions. Tiger's been in the news again here lately. We've watched him the last several weeks as he gets ready to come into next week's Masters. A lot of Tiger mania. Is there anything that you see, Monty, in this comeback? I mean, this is obviously probably about the third or fourth time that Tiger's come back, or so we thought. Anything different that you see in this comeback that maybe you haven't seen previously?
Okay, it's really funny because, look, every client, every person that follows me on the internet, at some point or another, Monty, what do you think about Tiger? What do you think about his swing? and I went on record like 4 or 5 years ago, that and it can be found on one of the message boards. Everybody was ranting and raving about how great Tiger's swing looked, were this, and all the angles were that, and this is the best swing since Hogan. And I very succinctly said, a back injury is imminent. And I have said since I became an instructor and started studying the swing, which was about 10 or 11 years ago, I said, in my opinion, if you told Tiger to swing like Jim Furyk, he would still win golf tournaments. So what the swing is irrelevant because he's just that good. He's that talented. He's that driven. He's that whatever. So my premise has always been Tiger needs to have a golf swing that protects his body as much as possible. Golf swings are difficult on the body. But let's put a little stress. So my opinion has always been, coming into impact, Tiger's shoulder turn needed to be less vertical and a little flatter and around on his downswing. That's just been my 2 cents. And the latest incarnation of his swing that we've seen the last 3 months is a much flatter and less vertical shoulder turn on the downswing. So that long-winded response, I think his swing is as good for his body as I've ever seen it since I thought I had a clue on what a good golf swing was. So I think he is going – now how successful he's going to be, Tiger's skill, his greatest skill was never his swing, his short game, or his putting. It was his focus and his ability to play one shot at a time better than anybody that I've ever seen. Just a quick side note here, a story about Tiger. I watched Tiger snap hook 4 consecutive drives at a tournament and then get on the 5th tee that was a dog leg right and OB left and start it down the left-hand side and cut it back in the fairway. To me, that was the most impressive thing I have ever seen in golf. And so to me, Tiger's mental game, Monty, do you think Tiger's going to beat Jack's record? I have no idea. We don't know where his mental state is when he gets back in that position. But in my personal opinion, his swing is puts him in a position where physically he can succeed. So now it's just a matter if mentally he's still, even if he's 80% of the old Tiger mentally, that's still better than everybody else.
Yeah, well said. I think one of the things, Monty, that I see this time around with Tiger that I haven't seen for a little while, you're right, obviously some changes in the swing that hopefully is helping him be a little bit more comfortable physically. But I see a little bit more confidence. Obviously, when he first came out this season, he had some bad shots, bad putts, but that's to be expected. We all hit some from time to time. But he hasn't really played a lot of competitive golf for some time, so you've got to kind of, factor that in. But what I've noticed here in the last few weeks is a dramatic uptick in his comfort level and confidence out in the golf course. Even though he hasn't won yet, I mean, he's gotten up in very, very close in fact, he was in contention, was it last week or the week before? So, for somebody to come out that has really been sort of off the radar for several years, to be able to come that quickly back in line to coming close to being, the winner, tells you a lot, as you said, mentally, that he's preparing himself and he's comfortable with his swing. He knows there's still a few tweaks. I mean, even in Tiger's heyday, I can remember him saying, I wasn't playing my A game, and everybody's scratching their head. Well, what do you mean your A game? So that was kind of scaring everybody out in the PGA Tour, because they thought you just won the tournament by, 9 strokes, and that's not your A game. So, I think what it's going to take for Tiger to, and again, I agree with you, whether he gets Nicklaus's record or not, that's only time will tell. But what I like about how he's playing right now is I see a more confident and comfortable Tiger out in the golf course, and I think all of the other with time and more tournaments under his belt. And I don't know whether he's going to win next week or not. He may not even necessarily be in contention, but I think you're going to see that confident and comfortable level of playability while he's out there in Augusta. I think you're going to see that in his play, and that's a positive sign. Again, win, lose, or draw, and I'm happy for him. I'm glad to see him out there, and I know a lot of people talk about, well, is he doing this or is he doing that? It doesn't matter. Tiger knows what he's doing. He knows his game better than anybody else on the planet, and he just has to stay within himself and just feel comfortable and confident with what he's doing out there, and I think the sky's the limit. And again, whether he wins another 3 or 4 majors, who knows? But I think it's going to be interesting to watch him next week.
There's one other variable that I find extremely interesting, and I don't know, it's too soon to tell whether this is a positive or a negative, but I think we can all agree that throughout Tiger's career, he was very surly, almost to the point of being hostile on the golf course when he played. And now he seems to be and I was like, Tiger, come on, have some fun when you play. And now he seems to be a lot happier and having a lot more fun when he plays. But now that I've started this look, is that necessarily a positive? I don't know yet. But I do see that he's having a lot more fun on the golf course. And I think, like you said, only time will tell. Maybe surly and hostile is where he's at his best, But
right.
That's another variable that's introduced itself. He's having a lot more fun out there than he used to.
Yeah, and I enjoy. I watched him the last several weeks. I've watched him play. I certainly didn't see the whole, every round of the tournaments, but I watched a lot of the highlights, and I did watch some of the rounds. And, I liked what I saw, irrespective of his golf swing. I don't really, to be honest, I don't really look at his golf swing. I look at how he manages himself around the golf course. That's what impresses me the most. And that's why I said, I see that sort of level of confidence and comfortability with what he's doing out there. There was a point when, Tiger made so many different changes over the years, when he went from Butch and then he went to Hank and so on and so forth. And, it might take a year, and you would see him out there and he would kind of struggle a little bit as he was making these changes, which obviously anybody is going to do. But then there would be sort of almost like he would find that rhythm of whatever he was doing. He would find that rhythm again, and suddenly that confidence would pick back up. And that's what I'm starting to see now. It's still a little early, and I don't know how well he'll, as I said, do next week at Augusta. But I'm starting to see that level of confidence. And I think with the changes that he's made, as you pointed out, I think that if he stays with a swing that's going to be as low impact on his body as possible, I think that he's, only going to continue to get better and better as the weeks progress. So time will tell, as you said, and we'll see what happens. But I'm certainly glad to see him back and see him, a little bit of the old Tiger, if you will, mixed in with the new.
And being an instructor, when Tiger's doing well, the game becomes more popular, and we have more people coming to see us for golf lessons.
Yeah, that's right. So you're heading off to, just in our closing few moments here, Monty, you're heading to your first Masters next week. When are you heading out?
Yeah, I have a golf school Atlanta I'm doing a school for a group there in Atlanta of 12 guys, and it's Saturday and Sunday of the final 2 rounds of the Masters. So I'm heading out there Wednesday and Friday, and then while I'm there, I'm also going to try and qualify for the Champions Tour event that's there the following week.
Oh, fantastic! Well, very good. Well, Monty, I wish you much continued success, and I know you've had over the last year a little bit of a setback with your injury and that. So hopefully everything's firing 100%, and enjoy the Masters next week, and good luck the following week on re-qualifying for the Champions Tour. I have no doubt you'll make it out there, and you've obviously gone most of the way the first time around, and unfortunately had an injury that set you back, but at least you can use it as a learning experience to be able to prepare for the next one. So good luck with it, my friend, and let me know how you make out.
Thanks, Ted. I appreciate it.
All right. Have a good one, Monty, and thank you for joining me tonight in Coach's Corner.
Thank you.
All right. Good night. All right, that was my very special guest, Monty Scheinblum, great golf professional, and just sharing some thoughts with him tonight on the show, a little bit about rhythm and timing and all kinds of good things, and we just sort of close things off a little bit on some thoughts about Tiger for next week. I've got another great segment tonight that I want to share with you, and I think we're going to have a lot of fun with this tonight. My good friend, Brett Cohen, the golf fitness instructor and Fitness Over 50 Authority, and the founder of the New York Golf Fitness Guru, is going to be joining me here. And he's brought along with him another good gentleman, Dr. Thomas Kearn, who is a chiropractor with the Axon Health Associates, also from the New York area. And they're going to bring to the show a great series and with some great topics. And it's about meaningful mobility, the key to unlocking the power in your golf swing. It's a 2-part segment. We're going to try and squeeze it all in within the next hour, but let me just tell you a little bit about each of them, and then I'm going to bring them onto the show. As I mentioned, Brett's been on the show many, many times, a gentleman that I refer to many, many times as our fitness guru here on the show. And he's, as I said, a golf fitness instructor and Fitness Over 50 Authority, founder of NY Golf Fitness Guru. And he's been involved in the fitness industry for over 17 years, specializing working with golfers and individuals over 50, and is the only trainer in New York to hold 2 golf fitness certifications, Titleist Performance Institute and Czech Institute, as well as 2 fitness certifications specializing in the mature population. Joining him tonight as well is Dr. Thomas Kearn from Axon Health Associates. And a little bit about Thomas. Thomas graduated from West Virginia University in 2010 with a BS in exercise physiology and an area of emphasis in aquatic therapy. Continued his education in New York Chiropractic College, where he earned his doctorate of chiropractic degree. During his studies, he completed a prestigious internship at South Shore Neurologic Associates in Chronic Pain Division, where he focused on high complexity cases featuring a multitude of neurologic conditions and chronic pain patients. And he's also a former athlete, so he understands putting a lot of pressure on the body. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the things that can help with the mobility. And let me just bring both of them on to the show tonight. Good evening, Brett and Thomas. Welcome to Golf Talk Live.
Hey, Ted. Good evening.
Hey, Ted. How's
Good
it
evening.
going? Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Thomas, thank you for joining us. First time on the show, and Brett, is always welcome back.
Thank you, Tim.
Brett, I'm going to let you jump right in here. We kind of set things up a little bit, what we're going to be talking about tonight. And I'm going to let you, and I think as I understand everything correctly, you're going to sort of lead things off a little bit. And certainly, Thomas, I want you to jump in along the way where you feel appropriate. And then I think on the second part, Thomas, I think you're going to sort of spearhead a little bit more of that. And I'm going to sit very patiently and kind of follow along and then may jump in with some thoughts as well. But, Brett, I'm going to let you start the discussion, so go ahead.
Yeah, so tonight we're talking about mobility. And we're going to define what it is, where we need it in our bodies, what can happen in your body or to your body and your golf game if you don't have it, where you need it, and how we can improve mobility with both exercise and with the help of medical professionals like Dr. Kearn.
Perfect. So let's start the obvious. And what is mobility? Let's talk about that. And obviously, as always, Brett, we're going to wrap this in and talk a little bit about golf and how it is an important factor in your golf game. So for those of you listening, say, well, why are we talking about this? How's this going to help my golf game? Well, listen to the next hour and you're going to understand why. So first off, let's talk about what is mobility. Give us a sort of a general overview.
Yeah, so the general overview would be, in everyday language, we think of mobility as just having the ability to move. So mobility basically means movement. When we're talking about the body, in reference to the body, mobility is the combination of muscular flexibility, tissue extensibility, and the normal range of motion at a joint. And that is a must for proper movement mechanics and to reduce the risk of injury. So we need mobility at certain segments of our body. And if we don't have mobility at those segments, then oftentimes we will get pain in the segment above or below the segment that's designed to be mobile.
Right, and I know you've talked about that before. Obviously, if you have, say, as an example, something that happens with your knee, it's going to affect both above and below the knee, correct?
All right, so basically, in order to define this for the audience, I think the best way is to talk a little bit about what I know as the joint-by-joint approach, which is basically stating that you want to think of the body as just a stack of joints, and each joint, in some cases, a series of joints and several segments together, like the thoracic spine. That's the part of the spine where the rib cage is, the lumbar spine or your lower back. They have certain characteristics of mobility or stability, and if the pattern is broken or altered in any way, then a compensation can occur in the segment above or below, which leads to irritation, inflammation, pain, and then if it goes long enough, injury, and eventually it can even lead to a surgery. So there are certain segments that are designed to be mobile. That's the segments that we're talking about today. And if they're not, the segment above, so where you referenced the knee before, that is inherently a stable segment stuck between the ankle and the hip. So if the ankle and the hip are not as mobile as they need to be, oftentimes the knee can complain. Right.
So it kind of gives you feedback in a lot of ways when other areas of the body aren't working. One of the interesting things we're going to share with the audience a little bit later on in the broadcast, because I know you put together a great article, if you will, on what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to direct the folks after the show if they want to go and read things in more detail, where they can find that. But what was interesting about mobility is you kind of broke it down in a couple of areas, and I want you just to touch a little bit on each of them. But, you talked about in our earlier beginnings in life and generationally, obviously, in our primal beginnings, as you put it, and then obviously you talk a little bit about today. So kind of define that, what you mean by obviously earlier beginnings and a little bit about mobility, and then talk about today as how our bodies have changed.
Sure. Well, primal beings, we needed to be mobile to survive, and that's really just up to the last 100 years or so. We needed to be able to squat and to lunge, to bend, to push, pull, twist, walk, jog, run, sprint, and carry just to survive in a hostile environment. And we were meant to move. But unfortunately, modern society has now altered things drastically. We live in complete contrast to what we were designed to do. And most people spend their time in in a chair, sitting at work, sitting on the way to and from work, and even when they get home from work. So we are essentially immobilized by our working environment, and that causes problems in the body. And even people with good intentions that go to the gym, as we've discussed before, they may gravitate to a machine, and a machine is just a chair with a weight stack next to it. So they're just immobilized all day long, and that causes dysfunction in the body. It just means that you physically can't move the way we're designed to move anymore.
Right. So talk a little bit about how mobility works in the body. What specifically? I mean, and again, we'll try to draw a parallel with golf as best we can, so that people get a working understanding of that. But talk a little bit about how it actually works in the body, and specifically, you mentioned about the joints, sort of a joint by joint, what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Right. So I mentioned earlier that it's a combination of muscular flexibility and the normal range of motion at a joint. And the joints that we need to be mobile, we're going to start from the ground up. Since golf is a ground-based sport, your feet are connected to the ground. We want to talk about the joints from the ground up, and that starts with the big toe. The bending backwards of the big toe sets up the next segment, the foot for stability, which when we have an arch in our foot, it's a stable segment. All the segments above the foot have to be stabilized by the foot and the ankle. The knee is inherently a stable segment, although it does need to be mobile enough to bend 90 degrees, but we don't want it to rotate. The hip, the segment above, is a mobile joint. The segment above that, the lumbar spine, a stable segment. Segment above that, thoracic spine, a mobile segment. And then we get to the shoulders. They need to be mobile as well. And the upper cervical spine requires mobility as well as the wrist. And those are all essential elements or joints that are involved in a mechanically correct golf swing.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, in my earlier segment with one of my fellow professionals, we talked about sequencing, and, you sort of laid it out there. I mean, obviously golf is from the ground up. I mean, the ground is where we make contact with earth and are in our feet. And obviously the club is in our hands. So there's a little bit of a distance between their feet and their hands as far as our different joints that we're using in order to execute a successful golf swing. So we want to make sure we're in sequence. And as you pointed out, if something in that sequence isn't working correctly, then it's going to throw everything out and cause, obviously, poor golf shots is the least of it, but can also cause it to be out of pattern, if you will. So you've got some things here which I thought was kind of interesting. You referred to as the 4 T's that can alter sort of a normal pattern that we would use in our everyday golf swing. So talk a little bit about that. And then, Dr. Kearns, I'd like you to maybe jump in, too, with a little bit of thought on some things that you see. Obviously, you, I'm sure, have dealt with a lot of different athletes, but golfers particularly. Some of the things that fall within these 4 categories that you can explain can be some of the cause of it. So, Brett, go ahead and start first, and
Sure.
Dr. Kearns, and I'd like you to jump in as well.
So we're
absolutely.
discussing what can alter the normal pattern of mobility and stability, and you referred to the 4 T's. The first is traumas, or that would include accidents, chronic poor posture, repetitive movement injuries. The next one is thoughts, so stress, anxiety, depression. They could all contribute to altering the normal pattern. Toxins, what you eat, what you drink, and what and how you breathe. And technique, so poorly learned skills as well as poor movement patterns. These are all factors that go into changing or altering the normal pattern of mobility and stability in the body.
Right. And, we were also talking in the earlier segment, we were sort of finishing up with Tiger and talking about some of the injuries that he's experienced, his back and his knee and so forth. So, Dr. Kearns, just sort of talking and sort of brushing along some of these 4 T's, if you will. Talk about, let's say, trauma. Obviously, somebody injures themselves on the golf course. What happens to the body? Obviously, it gets inflamed, but we sort of compensate with other things as well in order to avoid that injury or avoid exacerbating that injury. So talk a little bit about that, some of the things that you've seen coming into practice that are golf-related in some of these areas that Brett just mentioned.
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing is usually generally traumas or micro traumas that we call it, that we refer to, which are usually caused by repetitive motion. Just like a baseball pitcher might have shoulder injuries. We see a lot of that times often in the elbows, that from either hitting a root, sometimes people can hurt their elbows or hurt their shoulders that way. And just from taking hundreds and hundreds of shots a day, that eventually builds up. And the muscles wear out, and usually it's, because of poor mechanics or something along those lines. When you look at Tiger, even with his back fusion surgery, chances are that L5-S1 joint that he ended up having fused was not really the biggest problem. That's just kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back. He probably had deficiencies somewhere else, in whether it may be the hips, and that didn't allow him to have the proper stability in the lumbar spine, so they had to go in and surgically create it. So now he's going to have another effect, which they sometimes call the zipper effect. So now the joint above it and below it is going to have to make up for that loss of motion within that joint. So very oftentimes you'll see injuries like that come into the practice. And these are not injuries that sometimes you do have ones that happen, you hit a root like I referred to, which is probably one of the more common ones I see with the golf swing. But these happen over years. It really is a cumulative effect. And then all of a sudden you kind of have one incident that's going to kind of trigger off that inflammatory cascade that you mentioned. And that does usually trigger a bunch of compensation through whether it be the knee, the hip, or other body parts.
Right, and let me just add one more thing, Dr. Kearns, that I'd like you to talk about as well, which I find very interesting. A lot of people may not realize can affect ultimately their golf game, and that is, a word that's been thrown around for probably the last decade or so is toxins. People for most of their life never even heard of toxins other than toxic waste that maybe got spilled in a lake or a river, but it's now more prevalent in a lot of the things that we eat. And this is true as well, is what we're putting into our body, whether we're eating or even the environment to a certain degree, creates toxins that ultimately can inflame the body. And that's something that you see as well, correct? In your practice, you see a lot of inflammatory muscles and things that could be caused by toxins. So what would you suggest for some of the golfers listening out there? Obviously, we want to get them eating nutritionally a little bit better, but what are some things that they can do to keep some of that inflammation down?
Yeah, to keep a lot of the inflammation down, even off of, proper stretching and foam rolling, stuff like that can certainly help reduce some of the lactic acid buildup and inflammatory substances that you have within the muscles. But as far as your body intake, obviously, you're always going to need protein. You're always going to want to watch your processed foods. Those are going to really set off inflammatory cascades within the body. You really want your stuff to be more organic-based, more natural. There are some supplements that are out there, something like turmeric, which is an herb that you can add to your dishes. Something's called boswellia, which has actually been shown to have just as much of an inflammatory effect as an Aleve or Advil or OTCs, over-the-counter anti-inflammatories. And so those are usually something when I have a patient that comes in acute, where they just started to experience this pain, I'll sometimes recommend a supplement such as that. And it's really easy to add into your diet.
Yeah, and the reason why I wanted to bring that one up, Dr. Kearns, was simply that, a lot of people that go out to the golf course, of course, they want to part way around, maybe want to grab a snack, and there's obviously some healthier alternatives because, people don't realize this, even though golf is not a contact sport, the same as, say, football or other sports, it does require a certain amount of physical stamina to play 18 holes. And depending on where you are, especially down here in the south where it gets a little hotter and that, you've got to be able to sustain that energy for that, what could be 4 to 5 hours of a round. So obviously, eating a chili dog at the turn or, having a couple of, cold beers or something like that as well that is going to dehydrate you is certainly not going to help you, but going to add to some of that inflammation a little bit as well, correct?
Yeah, that's 100% correct. You're definitely going to want to watch your diet. Sugar is going to be really, really also very inflammatory. So that's one thing that you bring up a great point. Just people, if they bring pack snacks in their bag, take a look at the nutritional label. Protein bars are very high in sugar. Even protein drinks, They can be very high in sugar. And that can give you a short-term little pick-me-up. But that can also bring you crashing down, as you get into the third or fourth hour of play. And that will dehydrate you as well. Beer, is always tempting on the course. But that's also going to dehydrate you. And, that will affect your hydration levels. And that's going to affect your energy overall. And it's going to affect your focus. And that'll cause your score to go down or a score to go up.
Right. And, that's why I always say, Brett, is let's save that for after you've played your golf game. Maybe have a cold one to celebrate a good round. Brett, I want to get you to jump back in here as well. So we understand now a little bit better about mobility and a little bit of the role that it plays in general. But how do we assess mobility? How do we, get an assessment of how good our mobility is and maybe areas that we need improvement on? Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. And this kind of will fall into the comment you made earlier about sequencing. We're going to bring that back up as well. So what I do to discover whether somebody needs help with mobility or not is by using a movement screen. I use the TPI Level 1 movement screen as well as what's known as the functional movement screen. And that allows me to understand what someone's physical limitations are and then how that influences their movement. This is a critical piece of information, understanding why certain characteristics might be present in their golf swing. And that is what TPI refers to as the body-swing connection. One of the strongest correlations that TPI has found is a relationship between a test or screen known as the overhead deep squat and loss of posture or early extension. So an overhead deep squat is having your arms extended overhead, holding a stick or a dowel or a golf club, locking out your elbows, feet shoulder-width apart, and sitting or squatting to the point where your hips are below your knees and your arms are in line with your shins or your tibia. It's quite challenging. So the vast majority of people that take that screen do not pass. And the correlation is that there's a 90% chance that you will early extend, which means your hips will come towards the ball too soon in the downswing portion of the golf swing if you do not pass that screen. And that will take you out of sequence. So the desired sequence is the hips, the torso, arms, and the club. That's the desired kinematic sequence, the ability to transfer energy from the ground up. So if you fail that overhead deep squat, it's going to be 90% chance you're not going to be hitting in sequence.
Yeah, and that's obviously crucial in trying to execute a proper golf swing. If you're out of sequence, most likely you're going to be out of balance as well in your golf swing. And this is something that, again, that we touched on a little bit earlier in my first segment was, sort of swinging within yourself. And I know we've already touched on a little bit about this, some of the things that happen when there's a loss of mobility. And I want you to do that. But and Thomas, I want you to also jump back in as well here and talk a little bit. Brett, I want you to lead it off, but Thomas, I want you to jump in here as well and talk a little bit about, I think there's a misconception in golf that everything revolves around the big muscles, but there's also a lot of little muscles that engage as well. And when those are injured, sometimes we don't notice them right away because they're not big muscles. Obviously when you pull something in your shoulder, your back muscle, you feel that right away. But sometimes there's smaller muscles that help with stability. So, Brett, talk a little bit about some of the things that happen when you lose the mobility, and then Dr. Kearns, I want you to jump in and talk about how we can identify some of these stabilizing muscles when they're not firing on all cylinders either.
So you wanted to know what happens when you lose mobility? Was that the question?
Yes. Yes.
Right.
Yep.
So when we lose mobility, the first symptom is going to be not be able to move the body properly. So we talked about the joints that need to be mobile. That's going to alter your movement patterns. The second thing is if you do that pattern again and again, like Dr. Kearns referred to, a repetitive movement pattern with dysfunction, over time the accumulation of that dysfunction will lead to irritation, inflammation, and pain. So that reflects in the joint above. Oftentimes we just call that the symptom of what's wrong. He mentioned Tiger Woods earlier, not actually what's wrong, but the symptom of what's wrong somewhere else in the body. In terms of the kinematic sequence, if you're not able to do that overhead deep squat, more than likely the culprit is going to be your ankles and your hips, and we're finding that for most everyone, the ankle is a huge problem. Lack of ankle mobility causes the body to shift forward onto the balls of the foot, which you could call a loss of balance, or even the inability to hip hinge or get into proper golf posture right at the get-go, right at the start. So ankle mobility is a key element to good golf. I'm spending a lot more time working on my clients' ankle mobility issues.
Yeah. Well, and that's an area, again, I think a lot of people focus on a lot of the big muscles in the body when they're thinking of their golf swing, but there's a lot of little muscles too that engage in areas of the body that people don't realize the importance that they play in the golf swing. Dr. Kearns, maybe you can just touch and explain a little bit because you see, the body in its entirety. You understand how everything sort of fits together. And I'm sure you see, as you mentioned earlier, somebody hitting maybe a root or something creates an injury in the wrist. But sometimes these injuries don't always show up right away. So how can we identify when something's maybe not working right or isn't, working as effectively as it should? How do we work through that without doing further injury? And how do we, look out for things like that to prevent, making it worse?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. It's tough to answer all in one little bit, but there are certainly definitely some signs that you might find. One thing I'd like to talk about is actually something called proprioception. So proprioception is actually the body's awareness of where it is in space. So like if my hands are over my head, I know that because of proprioception, and that's all relayed back to your brain through muscles and ligaments. Now, anytime you have an injury, that proprioception can be damaged, and it will actually delay the response. And to kind of bring it back to sequencing, that will actually delay your sequence. It will actually alter your timing, and that can actually lead to an injury. There are several types of, just similar to how Brett will actually do the overhead squat. One of my favorite techniques to look at to identify this is actually a one-legged stand. This identifies a lot of different things as far as hip stability, what muscles might be stabilizing, which is obviously huge in the golf swing, and it will also look at ankle mobility and ankle stability, knee stability. So now if I have a patient stand on one leg for 30 seconds and they're wobbling all over the place, I know that there's some sort of muscle that is not stabilizing properly, and that could be setting them up for disaster. Any time that you have had a previous injury as well, that's going to alter your proprioception as well. So you talked about how everybody thinks of those big muscles. People, think of big back muscles, arm muscles, shoulders, and hips for golf. But to actually stabilize the back, you're actually relying on very tiny little muscles called multifidi. Those attach to each one of the vertebrae. And after you have a back injury, neurologically, it's not one of those muscles that you can flex and contract like your six-pack, It's not one of those muscles.
Right.
It happens reflexively. And after you have an injury, a back sprain, some people might have had a car accident way back when, that would damage that neurological relay. So those multifidi muscles don't necessarily stabilize when they should. And a lot of times I see this actually in people who just say, I'm just always so stiff. I'm so stiff, or, I stretch and my hamstrings just won't loosen up. My hamstrings are always tight,
right.
and I stretch every day. That's one of the telltale signs that there is a lack of core stability. Is really one of the biggest things. As soon as somebody tells me that their hamstrings have been tight their whole life, I'll look at the hamstrings, but chances are I'm going to treat the core because I know that that's not working. The hamstrings are really compensating hard to try and keep everything stable, including the pelvis. So that's, you can do other tests such as a plank and just see where you might feel the weakness, or if your butt's dipping down, you're going to have a lack of core. And that's really where I start with most of my patients.
Do you typically, and this is again for you, Dr. Kearns, do you typically see some of these injuries or some of these areas of weakness in any one demographic? Is it more commonly in older patients that you're seeing, male or female, or is it sort of pretty even across the board? Where do you traditionally see a lot of this?
I will generally see it in males. Probably 45 to 65 is usually the demographic I'm looking at, where I'll see a big lack of mobility. The younger people who come into my office, that's generally going to be more of a traumatic injury. Maybe on their backswing they felt a pop, and now they can't walk because their back hurts so much. That might be the more younger demographic. The older demographic, between, like I said, 45 and 65, is generally where I'm going to see the lack of mobility, that cumulative trauma and the repetitive movements just taking its toll over time. And that's usually when usually they always think, I can get through it. I just put a heat pack on and stretch a little bit more. But then finally they kind of give in, and they end up in my office.
Right. Which if they had gone in the first place, they wouldn't have had to, not saying that heat packs are bad or necessarily good or bad, but sometimes I think you need to just suck it up and do the right thing and go see a professional. Brett, I want to get you to jump back in here as well.
Sure.
We talked. You've explained a little bit about the obviously importance of mobility, and let's sort of put it in perspective a little bit about how does the lack of mobility affect my golf game? What are some things that I'm going to notice?
Well, the first thing you're going to notice is you're going to have an inability to even get into position to perform a mechanically correct golf swing. That's number one.
Right.
It's pretty obvious to someone like Dr. Kearns and myself that assess people all the time, and he does, as you could tell, he just mentioned movement screens that he's doing. They're very similar, if not the same as the ones that I'm doing. The first thing is you're looking at how somebody moves, and that gives you a lot of information as to what the brain is allowing the body to do. It's the nervous system that's controlling all of your movement. So if someone's lacking mobility, one, they're going to have difficulty getting in position. Two, they may already be exhibiting symptoms somewhere else in the body. Remember, it's the segment above or below. They also probably will be frustrated that they're not increasing their distance, their driving distance or power, which is part of the title of this discussion, is meaningful mobility, the key to unlocking the power in your golf swing. And the reason I use the word power is this, and Dr. Kearns brought up the word proprioceptors or proprioception, is a jammed joint or a mobile joint creates weak muscles, and the opposite is true. A mobile joint creates strength. So if our nervous system is receiving proprioceptive signals telling it that a joint is closed or compressed or immobile, it immediately creates a reflex response to decrease muscle activation in the body to protect the joint. And those of us who understand power know that power is the accumulation of strength times speed. So we're eliminating strength right off the bat if the joints that need to be mobile are not mobile. So we need mobility to allow for the generation of elastic energy between muscles and body segments, and that's what allows us or gives us the base for efficient power production.
Right. And let me ask you, Dr. Kearns, about things that obviously, as we age and start getting out, obviously there's things that we can do to prolong. I mean, inevitably we're all going to lose, power, and our posture is going to change over time. But and I know we're going to talk about this more in the second half of some things that we can do. But there's obviously going to be more increased risk of injury when these things are not as mobile as they should be. And as Brett just pointed out, there's going to be certainly a loss of power, which obviously translates into distance. And obviously creates a poorer posture, which also is going to increase the risk of injury. And that's a lot of what you see in your practice, correct?
Correct, yeah. I mean, I see a lot of that with the loss of mobility. I mean, I see people just looking, I'll have them often take just video of their swing, and just seeing the lack of mobility, they'll eventually end up in pain if they're not already in it.
Yeah, and as you talked about, you both talked about earlier, there's certainly some telltale signs that the folks can see that lead up to the inevitability of some sort of dysfunction in the body or lack of mobility. And that's when you start to feel some and see some of those symptoms, that's when you really need to start addressing it, not wait until it becomes the problem. Now, for you golfers out there that are tuning into the show tonight, I've got two great guests, Dr. Thomas Kearns and, of course, my good friend Brett Cohen, who are talking about mobility and some of the issues that we face in golf. And Dr. Kearns, we're going to start you off on the second, and Brett, of course, I'm going to have you jump in. We're now going to talk about can the mobility problems that we face from time to time, can they be solved through exercise, or what do we need to do? So, Dr. Kearns, why don't you start us off that? If I've got some mobility problems, can I just sort of exercise them away alone, or do I need to do something else?
I mean, that's a great question. It takes a lot of work. I always give my patients homework whenever they come in to address mobility issues, and mobility is generally the biggest thing I'm working on, and it can be fixed. The toughest part is accurate diagnosis of it, though. If you don't know what to fix, you can't just kind of go in and shotgun it and hope something sticks. So, there's not just everybody's different. Everybody has different muscle imbalances that have gotten them to that point and to begin with. I bring up baseball too. They're going to present differently than a golfer would. And growing up too, through your adolescence, what sports you've played is going to also play a role in that. The biggest thing I stress to my patients is just move. I don't care what you're doing, just move. You sit at a desk all day, and it's not that sitting's bad for you. It's that the lack of movement is what really becomes bad for you. They'll sit in front of their desk for 8 hours, only getting up to go to the bathroom. That's right. That's tough. And they think maybe an hour of yoga a night is going to offset 8 hours of sitting. It's just not. You have to do something. You have to be active. There are certainly many stretches people have done. You can go onto YouTube and find anything with the foam rollers or stretching and active assisted stretching, stuff like that will certainly help your mobility. But I really think that the biggest thing is first identification of what your problem area is. And then, like Brett has talked about too, you can do exercises to strengthen that. By creating strength in a joint that might be weak, you will help the other segments above and below.
Mm-hmm. Talk about, if you wouldn't mind, the mobility dysfunctions. There's obviously a couple of categories. Talk about the categories, and then, Brett, I want you to jump in as well. What are the differences, and what are some of the things that we might find in under these categories?
Sure. Answer that
that's for Dr. Kearns. I'm sorry, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Can you repeat the question for me?
Mobility dysfunctions can be separated into two main categories. Talk a little bit about each of the categories that and what's underneath them.
Sure. You have the joint mobility dysfunctions where that essentially is going to really be more of the arthritic type of conditions that you're going to have, the joint capsule, what we also refer to as joint subluxations or joint fusions. If you look at Tiger, where he now has that joint fusion, you can do all the amount of exercise in the world, you're not going to unfuse that joint. He has lost mobility there. So that's something that I work as a chiropractor, I probably am most familiar with, and that is really where that's my bread and butter. So that's where you're working with arthritic conditions and you're just trying to basically gain some of the mobility back in there. And that arthritis is a very umbrella term. It always starts at, end stage is when you have bone spurs, stuff like that, that everybody hears.
Right.
But it really starts in the soft tissue. If the body lacks that movement and doesn't go through the full range of motion as it should, the body will eventually just start to naturally kind of fuse the joint. It is kind of a use it or lose it situation, and they'll end up with an even bigger loss of mobility that you can't always fix. If there is a bone spur that's preventing you from flexing your hip, you can't always fix that because it's an arthritic, bony block. You sometimes have to go in and surgically decompress that. Now, as far as the other one, tissue, there's also something called a tissue extensibility dysfunction. Now, this is something called where you're more so dealing with muscle flexibility problems, fascial restrictions, trigger points, scars, and this is another big part of what me and Brett work together with. Big thing is dealing with fascia. So fascia is actually kind of like a membrane that surrounds all of your muscles, and this really helps. Actually, what they're finding in the latest research is to help transfer energy throughout muscles. Now, repetitive motion and trauma can actually cause fascial restrictions and little adhesions within that fascia, which will allow the muscles to not glide appropriately. So they won't be able to go through their full range of motion. So that's where we use several techniques as far as exercise or some manual therapy, massage type techniques, where we try to loosen up and break up those restrictions. And Brett could probably talk about how he works with that with exercise.
Right, and as a fitness professional, Brett, I know that you deal a lot with the tissue extensibility dysfunctions, and you have a lot of great exercise strategies that you use. So let's walk through that a little bit and talk about some of the things that you're doing to address some of the issues that Dr. Kearns just talked about.
Right, so that's what I come across every single day, and that's where everybody that I work with begins. So my clientele is typically in the same age range that Thomas mentioned. His were 45 to 65 and even up males who definitely need help with mobility. And they're all locked in a chair all day long. They all have the same postural issues. Just they manifest slightly different from each other, but they have to start in the same place. So that place is by teaching them a process known as self-myofascial release or rolling, body rolling. And that's where we use objects like rollers and massage sticks and different types of balls, different size balls, to help manipulate this soft tissue and try to break up the adhesions and the scarring and the trigger points to create more extensive and healthy and flexible tissue. Oftentimes I'll get reports from someone that has never done it before. They'll come back and say, I did that rolling thing 3 times this week and I feel so much better. Because they've never experienced that sensation before of feeling more free to move. So that's the first step. The second step is learning how to stretch what they just rolled, or isolated or targeted stretches that are going to target the specific area that needs to be lengthened. Static stretching could be a great tool for developing mobility, but after rolling. So it's rolling first, then stretching. And then the third step is to provide some gentle movement to the joint that needs to be moved. And so joint mobility drills that target the problem area with motion, and we're going to target the ankles and the hips and the thoracic spine and the shoulder joint and the wrist and even the upper cervical spine with some head turns as well. And then I'll often add on what I call three-dimensional or dynamic stretches which is now taking the body in and out of a movement pattern repetitively that requires you to stabilize multiple joints while you're moving. So it requires flexibility, mobility, stability, balance, and strength at the same time. So I add one of those layers on top of the other to help create a more flexible and mobile body with exercise.
Brett and Dr. Kearns, you both really touched on sort of a commonality with a lot of things. Many of the people that you're working with obviously fall into the same age category, but similar circumstances. Again, in today's sort of fast-paced world, if you will, we're utilizing a lot less of our physical body and using more of our brain power to do some of the day-to-day functions that we do. So, there's a lot of, dysfunction, if you will, in the average person. So, Brett, before I get you to go to your sort of bottom line and wrap this up, I want each of you to maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing as a general rule out there. I know you've touched a little bit about it, but what you're seeing out there with some of the people, Brett, that you're working with, and then obviously Dr. Kearns, some of the people that you're coming in, what are some of the common areas that you're seeing? And we'll try to relate it to golf as best we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
Brett, you go first.
Yeah, so some of the common areas, and I know Dr. Kearns would agree, is we're seeing limitations at the ankle. The major three joints are going to be the ankle, the hip, and the thoracic spine. Those are critical joints in relation to the golf swing. And him and I share a client of mine that I work with. Using those strategies I just spoke of was not making progress as rapidly as I would like to see. So I needed to refer out. Right. And that's part of the Titleist formula is to work with a team. I knew that he needed more help and guidance, and I couldn't see beyond what my tools allow me to see. So Dr. Kearns took over, and I would love for him to share that part of his experience with the audience, listening audience as well.
Sure. Dr. Kearns, please.
Yeah, sure. The patient specifically, that Brett was referring to, it's actually quite an interesting case. I mean, years ago, I think maybe 20 years ago, he ended up with a bad skiing accident, and we talked about trauma earlier in the show, and I took x-rays right in the office, and I saw right away he had tons of arthritis in his lower back, and that's where we kind of go back to the joint dysfunction and the joint mobility issues. He had bone spurs that he wasn't going to get all of the motion that a 22-year-old would get. It's just not possible. So what we have to do is I then have to train his body to adapt to absorb the load that we're going to be placed on the new joint. So one of the big places I ended up working on with him was his hips. His hips were going to be the real big. He was going to get the most impact with working on his hip mobility. His hips were still in pretty good condition, so what I had to do was train his hip muscles and hip joints to go into a bigger range of motion while still maintaining good form and adapting. So that's something that I see quite often. I see a lot of times in the lower back. It's probably the biggest thing I see is lower back pain, and what I end up having to do is work on the hips just to either open up their hips so they have a little bit more range of motion, and so they're not compensating and relying as much on stability within the lower back. And that usually makes a pretty big difference. And then I often refer to Brett when I need them to do exercises that are going to help them move and help with the sequencing and putting it all together. That's where he's invaluable.
Yeah, and I think it's important, and I want to just sort of, tie this into, why I wanted to have Brett. I know this is one of many great discussions that we're going to have throughout the year, and again, we're going to let the folks know here in just a little bit where they can go, and obviously we can't cover everything here on even an hour. There's just too much information, so we're going to redirect them to a website that they can go and actually see what we're talking about here in its entirety. You put together a great article. It's actually a 2-part article, and we're going to let them read that. But one of the reasons why I want to talk this, and I know some of the listeners might be thinking, well, why are we talking about all this? What has this got to do with my golf game? And the truth of the matter is that I see as an instructor, as a golf instructor, a lot of times I see right away, and I can tell. I may not, have the medical training and that, but I can tell by when somebody gets into their ready position. I can tell if their posture is bad because of how they address the golf ball. They're slumped over, and I talked about this earlier in the show tonight, or they're leaning a certain way because they're compensating for maybe an injury or a discomfort or dysfunction that they're currently experiencing. So I wanted to give an opportunity for people to hear both from the fitness side of things, but also from the medical side of things, how important it is that we make sure our bodies are functioning and our mobility is working properly. Because if you want to get out and enjoy your golf game, guys, but you're sort of limping along, or you're harboring injuries that you've been carrying for many, many years, as you described this patient you were talking about a moment ago, until you address those issues, they're just going to continue to compound, and ultimately you're going to have more issues that are going to be added on to your original issue because you're not dealing with it, and obviously the body has to adapt and make changes. So this is the reason, guys, why I wanted to do this topic tonight, and Brett, have you come on, and Dr. Kearn. So, Brett, let's just sort of wrap it up a little bit. Just talk about the bottom line, what people need to understand with this tonight's discussion, and then we'll give them the information where they can go and learn more.
Sure. So here's my bottom line. Bottom line is the opening I mentioned that mobility really means movement, and life is movement. Things that don't move are not alive. Movement is going to be the basic currency of health, of fitness, and performance. Great movement produces pain-free, high-level performance. Poor movement promotes pain and dysfunction. So if you want to move better, feel better, and play golf better, you need to improve your mobility.
Right, exactly. And obviously there comes a point in time where, as you just pointed out, Brett, certain exercises will help and will alleviate that, but sometimes you need to bring in a medical professional, a chiropractor in the case of Dr. Kearns, to take it that next step. So Dr. Kearns, maybe just touch a little bit about that again so that people understand that you're somebody that can help them through some of these issues so that they can go back and work with a person like Brett to be able to get out there and enjoy some great golf. So talk a little bit about that, what you can do to help them, and then Brett will let everybody know where they can go and get more information.
Yeah, sure. It's pretty simple as far as my role is concerned. Is generally, golf is a leisure sport, and it's tough for people to enjoy themselves when after every shot or every step they're complaining of pain or they're dealing with some sort of pain. So my whole objective is to get them out of that pain. And if you can, if I can have a patient play 18 holes without having neck pain that they've had for, 10 years, the last 10 years, that's very rewarding for me as a medical professional. That's really what I look for, is they can get back to doing the activities that they enjoy pain-free. And then when you want that performance enhancement, because you want to, everybody's a little competitive, that's when you can get in to see Brett and tie the whole two things together. But my biggest thing is really just helping people play golf to enjoy it more, play it pain-free, get out and have some more rounds, and hit a couple more balls at the driving range.
Right, exactly. And again, we can't emphasize enough that the importance of how mobility plays a key role in obviously our golf games. And when that mobility becomes hampered for whatever reason, whether it's a temporary issue that can be addressed relatively quickly through some of the steps that Brett talked about a moment ago, or whether you need to seek a little bit, further dealings with somebody such as Dr. Kearns, then those are things that are going to ultimately, again, help you long term. So we want to make sure we do that. So Brett, as I said, we sort of just touched on a few things. I tried to get as much in as I could, and I know we probably skipped over a little bit or brushed through some things, but obviously we're limited with time. So where can the folks go? You've put together a great article. I've read it all, and I think it's fantastic. And where can they go to read it in its entirety and learn a little bit more about what we're talking about tonight?
Sure. The website is www.nygolffitnessguru.com. And if they go to the blog tab, they'll see the two-part article that we just went over in the show. Just a little bit more detail there with some great pictures to demonstrate and illustrate some of what we're talking about and make it a little more digestible. It's a part 1, part 2 blog, and the title is Meaningful Mobility, the Key to Unlocking the Power in Your Golf Swing.
Yeah, and we all want more power, but we have to be in good shape and good physical health to be able to do that, and obviously have mobility. Let the folks know as well, Brett, if they want to learn more from you, how they can reach out, if they want to work with you, and also Dr. Kearns, how they can connect with you if maybe they have issues that need your attention and they happen to be up in the New York area. I know a lot of information can be gotten online, but sometimes you need to speak with a professional. How can they reach out to you as well? So Brett, go ahead. You start off, and then Dr. Kearns.
Yeah, it'll be the same website, nygolffitnessguru.com, and it has my phone number, my email address, and all my social media contacts, and location and business hours. And when I'm working with a golfer, if someone comes to me that already has pain, they do not work with me until they're out of pain. So I refer them straight away to Dr. Kearns, and if then we're working together and I see that we're not making the kind of progress I'd like to see based on previous injuries, like the client we were just discussing, then I have to send him to Dr. Kearns because he's the big guns and he's got to do what he needs to do and send them back to me.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's important, and I just want to add to very quickly is, I like the fact that the two of you have sort of partnered up, because Brett, as we've talked about before, you play a very crucial role in a golfer's health, in getting them, fit and ready to go out and play. But sometimes, those nagging injuries can be a little bit more in depth and need to be addressed by a medical health professional. And obviously, you found somebody. And I strongly urge to some of my fellow golf pros out there that this is a great setup here that Brett and Dr. Kearns have put together. So obviously, if you're up in the area, you may want to reach out to them and say, hey, I've got some students that I'm teaching here that maybe could use some fitness help. And some of them I know have some injuries, and maybe you can both help them out. But this is something that I recommend all golf professionals out there that are working, to improve their students. Sometimes there's things that are out of our wheelhouse, and we need to go to another professional such as Brett and Dr. Kearns. So, guys, thank you for putting together a great segment. I enjoyed it very much, and I want the listeners to follow up after the show. Not only directly, but to go to nygolffitnessguru.com to the blog tab and check out the article in its entirety. Thank you very much, guys. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for having us.
All right, appreciate it, Brett. Until next time, and Dr. Kearns, thank you very much as well for joining me here on Golf Talk Live. It's been interesting, and I've got a few aches and pains here. I'm going to do a little research, and I may have to reach out to you myself. I may have to come up to New York, but we'll see what happens. But great job, guys. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.
Good night.
All right. Good night, guys.
Bye-bye. Good night.
All right. That was my very special guest on Golf Talk Live. Brett Cohen, the golf fitness instructor and Fitness Over 50 Authority and founder of NY Golf Fitness Guru. And, of course, Dr. Thomas Kearn, chiropractor with Axon Health Associates up in New York area. So great article. Go to nygolffitnessguru.com to read the article that we talked about tonight. Actually, it's a two-part article on Brett's blog, and you'll get all the information that you need and what we were talking about tonight. And as I was trying to, emphasize here, it's not all about just trying to hit the perfect shot and execute the perfect putt. There's a lot of components that go into being a good golfer, whether you have aspirations of playing competitive golf or whether you're just out there with your weekend warriors and want to improve your golf game. If you're not physically in good health, if you're got aches and pains or some of the issues that they talked about tonight, by all means, reach out to professionals like Brett and Dr. Kearns. If you're not up in the New York area, obviously it may not be convenient. So, ask your golf professional that you're working with, if they know somebody in the golf fitness side of things that can maybe help you work through some of these. And if they're maybe working with a referral program or something with a local chiropractor that can help you with some of these issues. So, by all means, today is a new day in the golf industry. It's not just about hitting a bunch of balls on the golf range and playing a bunch of rounds of golf. There's so many things. These types of things that we're talking about here have been available to the pros. So if you want to be more like a pro, here's the way to do it. Because the pros, I guarantee you, are doing many of the things that we talked about tonight and working with professionals. So here's an opportunity for you weekend amateurs that want to get some help with your golf game. It's not just about golf instruction. It's also about making sure that your body's in condition and preparedness to be able to play your best golf. So rather than spending thousands of dollars on new equipment hoping to buy a better game, why don't you maybe get in touch with somebody like Brett or Dr. Kearns, as I said, in your area and see if they can help you with some of the physical sides of the game that need help with. Well, guys, it's been another great show. I enjoyed my discussion earlier with Monty Scheinblum. Thank you, Monty, for joining me. And again, thank you for Brett Cohen and Dr. Thomas Kearn for joining me on the second half of the show. And I will be back next week with a great guest. Of course, next week is Masters Week. And I've got a very interesting guest that's going to be joining me next Thursday night. Of course, we'll start the show off with the Coach's Corner panel, so I hope you'll stay tuned for that. And then we'll have some discussion as we continue on this journey in the 2018 season. Lots of great information that's going to be presented over the next little while. And next Tuesday on the Women of Golf show, of course, Cindy will be coming back, and we're going to be talking with a great gentleman from the Symetra Tour. He's in the media and public relations official, and he's going to be joining us, Zach Sapanik. And he's going to be bringing a great young lady from the Symetra Tour joining him as well. And we're going to be having some great discussions throughout the season with many of the winners from this season and from previous years on the Symetra Tour. Are going to be joining us again this season on the Women of Golf show. So make sure you tune in to blogtalkradio.com next Tuesday from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern. And on that note, guys, have a great weekend. Thank you always for your continued support of the show. I appreciate it very much, and I will continue to endeavor and do my best to bring you some great guests on the show and have some great panel discussions as well on the Coach's Corner panel. So until then, thank you, everybody. God bless, and I will see you next week right here on Golf Talk Live.